So what I'm going to share is a little bit about vision and future, and as we talk through it and as some of the changes have taken place and evolved already over the last couple weeks, some of this is not too far, and many of the technologies here today. And as we talk through this, it'll really kind of set up, a lot of this is people and process that's kind of lagging behind. So the concept here is talking about an era that's behind us, that's coming up right now as we look at what's behind digital disruption. So obviously we all experience and use a considerable amount of enabling technology, and it's empowering everything we do on a daily basis. I'm pretty sure there's not any of this technology that we aren't using on a regular basis. And what's interesting enough is, these devices, this technology is the Internet of Things that we're talking about, that many of us spend our times talking about day in and day out. And depending on what research you look at or the forecast, by 2020, the source I reference is citing that there'll be 35 billion devices connecting to what folks are now referring to as the universal network. So obviously that has a significant impact on the businesses, the institutions, the environments that we run. And the technology in and of itself really doesn't do anything on its own, right? I mean, it provides value, but it really has to be enabling technology, and it has to link to us as the humans and how we adapt to the technology, and more importantly, some of the business models. And that's really what has evolved over the last 10 years. If you look at the last 10 years, the digital disruption era has, changed every industry as it relates to technology. For me, 5 years ago, there was no way that I thought I would get off an airplane, summon an unmarked car from an untrained driver to pick me up and take me to business meetings. And I travel every week, and I can't tell you the last time I rented a car. So I use it day in and day out, and we all have probably personal experiences. And obviously this technology opened up the doors to changing these business models that met the customer, the user from their own experience. If we look at others, obviously Netflix. I have 3 kids. One's a college, a junior in college, and a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, and they don't know what cable TV and any of that is, obviously. So we can see that the technology is played a part in it, but the disruptors asked some very fundamental questions, and they were why questions. Why do we have to have transportation fleets to provide transportation service? Why do we need to invest in the capital as it relates to properties from a hospitality perspective? Why do we need money in the form that we have today? And obviously, why do we need to have physical locations to provide entertainment? All of those were fundamental questions, and so the disruptors are faced today. They can't sit still. They're going to have to continue to figure out, what's going to continually evolve the industry. This technology, the enabling technology, that 35 billion devices connecting to the network, the universal network, the business models that have evolved, puts significant pressures on the network infrastructures out there. Ours as consumers, individual consumers, and obviously institutions as a whole. And for me, I try to break this down because I kind of have a simple mind from that standpoint. And if we break down that 35 billion devices that's going to be connecting by 2020, and we look at the time that we're going to spend together here today, we break that down, that's about 1.3 million photos posted on Instagram. Now I left and my sons they were up, so I know that they're actually adding to that 1.3 million as we speak. They weren't sleeping anymore. I mean, if they were in school, my 17-year-old would be adding to that even while he was at school. 4 million Skype calls. Juniper as a global company, as I'm speaking, there's thousands and thousands of Skype calls happening over our network, and obviously that has an impact on the universal network. 100 million plus Google searches happening in the time that we're going to spend today, or this time here talking over lunch. 232 million YouTube videos. I know that, that if my kids are sleeping, they're still looking at YouTube somehow. I don't know how they do it, but they do. And I know that they do it in school. My 17-year-old watches these British soccer channels, and he's watching it during school, and somehow he gets away with it. Now, this is the best one. In this time that we're talking, 4.5 billion emails. Now, how many's doing email right now? Because I just did one. No, I didn't do it. So anyway, that in roughly 30 minutes, we're not going to spend 30 minutes talking today, but in 30 minutes, that 35 billion devices is going to generate, it's a doubling of bandwidth to the tune of 2.3 zettabytes of data, and that's 64 petabytes of data, and that's just what we just talked about in about 30-minute time frame. So it's a ton of pressure being put on all of our environments. And if we look at, from a business perspective, from an institution perspective, I've got this labeled really as critical network design, points, but these really are the high-level pillars, if you will, the foundations that we're all going to have to be cognizant of as we use technology and are using it in our businesses and institutions. And going back into from a daily perspective, looking at the Internet of Things and those 35 billion devices, we look at that, the average Internet user is going to contribute 1.5 gig a day. We talk about smart hospitals and smart cities and communities and smart, pretty much everything. A smart hospital is going to be generating 3 gigabits of data a day. Autonomous automobiles, which is probably a pretty scary thought for anyone at this point, but the reality of that is going to happen. I mean, if we look back on the last decade, many of us probably didn't think a lot of the technology, the disrupting that's been happening, we'd be using it. I'm the one person to be guilty of that as well, but that's 4 gig a day. An airplane, 40 gigabits of data a day, and then you look at a smart factory, 1 terabit of data being added a day as it relates to the Internet of Things. So it's significant pressures obviously putting on our environments. And from this standpoint, we really look at it, the technology has come to a point where digital mode, it's a digital mode of doing everything. It's the norm. Obviously, education as a service, that's been around for quite some time. So the focus is on the user, on the consumer, and it's driven from a convenience, from a cost and time savings. And the disruptors are going to have to, they're not going to be able to just sit still, and they're going to have to continue to evolve and bring things to market that are meeting customers where they're at. And we'll talk a little bit about that in some use cases as we look at what digital cohesion is. So the era behind digital disruption is what we've been referring to for about 18 months now as digital cohesion. And there's 4 factors that are at work and really creating a gem in the markets. And if you look at, we talked about the business models, they continually adopting and moving to the human behavior. So the business models play a part. User expectations, it's focused on the user experience. No matter what industry we're in, it's focused on the user from that standpoint. And obviously technology has caught up and is evolved and at a rapid pace of change, that the technology plays a hand in this too. And then lastly, the economics. This really is multifaceted, because a lot of it now we're seeing where the economics of some of the technology is not even generating or providing profits to entities, but they have to do it from a competitive standpoint. So look at free global communication, free translation, same day shipping. Those are not generating profits to entities. They're using them as competitive differentiators. So it's an economics model from that standpoint. If we look at, throughout history, obviously the business models have evolved and realistically they've been slow. And if you look at where we're at now, we're really at a point where, the technology is going to be at a point where it can react to us as humans and how we use it. We've all talked about how we're going to go online and shop and how we're going to do something from looking on the internet. Well, the time is going to be here and very soon where you're just online, you're not thinking about it. It becomes, the technology is a very every part of your fabric, the fabric of your life in terms of what you're doing. And so the technology from that standpoint isn't going to be the star. It's really the business model that's going to be the enabler from that standpoint. So digital cohesion, what is it? At a high level, it's a future in when applications or services are really self-assembling to deliver compelling services that are impacting what we do day in and day out. Irregardless of what industry we're in, it really is going to touch, us from a work perspective and from an everyday life experience. So it's moving from point services to really what we call holistic mega services or lifestyle services, however you want to look at that. Moving out of user-initiated tasks to predictive and autonomous. It's the technology will be in the background of our life, and it will predict and be autonomous in terms of when you need it. So the Uber example for me would be, I'm doing my travel and none of it is user-initiated, and I walk off a plane, I pick my bags up, and the Uber driver's there because he's, it's all tightly integrated into my calendar and to everything that we're doing. Move from static to adaptive as well. So there'll be a lot of things different. Learning curves will be radically different, and in the spirit of continually throwing myself on the bus, because that's what I'm good at, I just got a new iPhone 7, which for me is new. I hadn't had a phone in 5 years, and my boys, I kind of needed help, and they basically told me they're not going to help me. I'm outside of my SLA with them because my phone was so old, so they couldn't give me help, so I had to go upgrade. But the whole concept there is that the technology, the learning curves will be removed or dramatically removed. We've had to learn how to drive cars. We've had to learn how to use smartphones. I still learn how to use a smartphone. That is going to go away. And in some technologies and some experiences you probably already experienced where you don't have to learn how to use it. User-initiated to autonomous, moving from repeatable tasks to adaptive predictive. The whole premise of digital cohesion is taking a bunch of these individual services and the power of combining them and self-assembling them automatically in an autonomous manner creates much more value that they can do on their own, and that's really what will transpire there. Negotiated interoperability to open APIs, this will be significant. Today we live in an environment where entities can, through engineering and federation, they can communicate and connect and work with each other, but it's not true interoperability, and it's not an open environment, and those will be table stakes from a digital cohesion and from that era, as well as moving from low trust to high trust models. So a couple fun examples. Obviously, the timing of this works well in terms of some crazy things that happen in the industry. You find a giant in the internet space going after a food company, and so you wonder how that's going to translate. For us, we see it as answering, that question that plagues all of us. We never know what's for dinner. There's a lot of consternation. I know there's 5 of us at our house, and there's never a unanimous decision on what we're going to have for dinner. So obviously, if you fast forward and from a digital cohesion environment, the whole idea is bringing all of these services together and delivering, a service or an experience, obviously, and that's. Look at the Amazon Whole Foods situation. That is a big piece. I mean, for us, it clearly aligns with what we call digital cohesion. And the focus there is to be a part of what's going to happen as it relates to the experience there, because it segues outside of our personal consumption of dinner and eating, and it segues into another use case, which is really looking at all of us from a personalized perspective and a healthier you and well-being. The World Health Organization predicts by 2020, 75% of the deaths worldwide are going to come from chronic diseases, which that's obviously a scary statistic, and we all want to have a better answer to that. Well, this type of technology, digital cohesion, in that environment is going to have, an impact on that. Mobile services will exist. If they're not here today, they're very, very close. The technology is there. people, process are really what's kind of lagging behind it. But a mobile service will exist, and you'll subscribe to it, and you'll be able to have mobile diagnostics, biofeedback, personalized monitoring. It might be in the form of wearables that you're using, or things that you ingest, tablets that you ingest that provide monitoring back to devices. The technology, the cognitive learning, machine learning and AI and cognitive learning that's out there can already predict in advance incidents that might happen to a diabetic, for example. So, significant changes in healthcare and how we consume healthcare, and more importantly, how we become healthier as a society. Dramatic impacts to costs. Obviously, this is a very impactful use case as it relates to digital cohesion. So we talk about what's going to be needed. I kind of look at it from a technology. The technology is there. It's probably more there than we want to believe in some cases. Well, really, it's bringing together the business and the technology sides of it. There's going to be considerable advances in technology, but this really is where the business side of it has to come together, the people, the process. So a lot as it relates to industry alliances, governance, compliance. There will be a lot of things that have to happen there to bring all this together from an integration perspective. So we look at the pillars of digital cohesion are those 4 areas that I talked about: the automation, security, interoperability, performance. We look at foundationally the Internet of Things, and that connectivity are going to be foundational elements of it, as well as taking advantage of leveraging the data that's going to come from these Internet of Things and devices through analytics, machine learning, AI. So this really kind of creates a picture of what digital cohesion looks like. And we're going to just kind of highlight a couple of these. If we look at it from the pillars and opportunity, these are kind of the barriers, if you will, the things that we've got to work together as it relates to overcoming and taking advantage of it. So the first we talked about is performance. As we take advantage of cloud technology and cloud services, and we've learned great lessons there as it relates to compute and storage in the cloud. The problem there is we're creating a geographic distance between us, the user, and our experience in those apps. We're all using cloud services personally, and we're in our institutions, we're leveraging cloud technologies as well, obviously from a scale perspective, from an economics. But the latency is going to be an issue. We consider real-time interaction, anything 13 milliseconds or less, is what we as humans expect for a real-time experience. So the network and performance is obviously going to be critical, and that's going to be a barrier that we have to work collaboratively work to overcome. And the issue there is leveraging what we've already learned. We learned over the last decade that none of us care what kind of processor we buy in our computer anymore, right? I mean, that Moore's law has been kind of fading and quote unquote dead for a while now. So there's only so much more we can, as manufacturers, can put on chips. And from a device perspective, it's not a scale up issue that has to be addressed, it's a scale out issue. So it's really just putting technology and distributing it across an environment from a global perspective. Next, we look at the economics, and this is a scenario where today there's going to be a need, obviously, for innovation. And today we spend 90+% of our time keeping the lights on as it relates in a lot of our IT shops. And so the paradigm shift here is, how do we innovate? And the answer lies in what we call in our industry from a networking perspective. It comes in automation. The answer is automation, and automation is not a job killer, and it's not an opportunity to lose folks in the workforce. It's really the opposite. It's focused on replacing old work with new work and using technology to do things that we as humans can't do and keep up with. And if you look at the Internet of Things and the amount of data that's being put on environments, obviously utilizing technology and automation can play a big part in that. And so for us, what you'll hear from Juniper is kind of our thought leadership perspective, and we call it the concept of a self-driving network. So the focus there is that the technology's there. You should be able to have an environment, a platform that is self-configuring, self-managing, self-healing. It's autonomous, it's predictive, and it's aligning to your business goals and objectives or institutional objectives from that standpoint. So that's an area that we call automation, and it's a self-driving network from that standpoint, similar to obviously autonomous automobiles. Next, we talk about interoperability. This is truly having interoperability at all layers inside of an organization. Whether it's the lowest level from an OSI model that many of you guys are obviously familiar with, but getting outside of the applications as well. It's true interoperability from a business and API perspective, so open at all environments. And then lastly, it's a scenario of trust, and this really is looking at security from a completely different perspective, and it's looking at it from going out and collaborating and building secure networks versus just adding more network security and complexity to environments. So the idea is that you use the entirety of the network, all elements, devices, switches, wireless access points, PCs, laptops, servers, etc. Every element in the network becomes an enforcement and detection point, and actively works from a collaboration from real-time global threat protection as well. And the idea there is to build a secure network that is built on partnerships and ecosystems, because there's more than just a technology element. I mean, the job skills and personnel, everyone needs to be thinking security as it relates to the future from that standpoint. And from a trust perspective, it's really looking at it from building security into everything. So I'm going to wrap up here, but as far as a quick summary of what we talked about, we address performance with Scaleout designs and architectures from a performance perspective. We take advantage of economics through automation, bringing true interoperability and openness, and then obviously ensuring trust by building secure networks. So I'm going to leave you with, these were a couple white papers that you're welcome to. Digital Cohesion, many of you had copies of that. It was on the website, so you have access to that. Concepts that we're building around the self-driving network, and then software-defined secure network is really looking at it from a paradigm shift as we talk about building secure networks. Thank you, everyone.
So much.
Yes, thank you.
I appreciate it very, very much.